Welcome to the 80-20 Baseball Podcast. Strike! The 80-20 Coaching Masterclass. Our weekly get-together where coaches go from new to good and good to great. Mastering the fundamentals and the art of coaching.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's get-together. We're going to talk about Phase 4 in our series titled The 5 Phases of Hitting. I apologize for last week for the partial mistitling of the episode. I got ahead of myself and titled part of last week's episode Phase 4, when in fact it was still Phase 3 of the 5 phases of hitting. This week is Phase 4, swing decisions. We're going to talk swing decisions. We're going to look at this differently than we've even discussed on this podcast in the past. First off, we need a little more hockey culture in the baseball community. We need a little more hockey culture everywhere in society. I'm staring at a picture of Jack Hughes. As many of you know, he scored the game-winning goal for Team USA in the gold medal game just the other day. I'm looking at a picture of him missing pieces of his teeth. Watching the gold medal hockey game got me thinking again about that hockey culture. Toughness, humbleness. Did you watch Jack Hughes' interview after the game? Humble, super humble. These are very humble players. I think hockey players are so grounded. They praise their teammates a lot. I mean, it's blue collar, it's family, it's awesome. I love hockey culture. Now, implementing hockey culture into your baseball team, that's going to be a challenge, definitely in one season. But why is it hockey can do it and the other sports can't? It's because other sports have decided to get away from that. More coddling, more about the individual rather than the team. And I just think we need to get more hockey culture, hockey influence. So, gold medal win for the USA. I know we got quite a few Canadian listeners to this podcast, and I want to shout out the Canadian listeners because the culture of hockey really comes from those hockey countries. I'd like to say it comes from the United States, but I think it really comes from Canada and some of those Eastern Bloc countries, that blue collar, team first, humble attitude. So big shout out to all the Canadian listeners of this podcast. I know baseball is huge in Canada, but Canada is the number one hockey country. Good stuff there. And it comes off the heels of talking about the movie Miracle last week. So it was very fitting. Now let's talk about swing decisions. If you've been listening to this podcast for some time, I hope you have gone over and read the article about Plan A and Plan 2. There's Plan Take, but we're not going to talk about Plan Take right now. Now, to start off the swing decision discussion today, which will be different than previous discussions, I got some really interesting stats that can highlight swing decisions and even differently than they get talked a lot about. Here are two quotes from Wade Boggs and Ted Williams, two of the greatest hitters of all time, that highlight some of the stuff we'll talk about here. Ted Williams said, quote, "When a batter starts swinging at pitches just 2 inches out of the zone, meaning the strike zone, he has increased the pitcher's target by 38%. Now, I know for youth baseball, those pitches 2 inches outside of the zone are getting called strikes. But it highlights the importance of making proper swing decisions so we can really challenge the pitcher to come to us. And as players move up, that strike zone gets more true. So if you want your player, or if you're a kid listening, if you're a player listening to this, and I know we got players listening to this, which is awesome. As you move up, that strike zone will shrink. The strike zone will stay more true. In other words, pitches out on the fringes, 6 inches off the plate are not going to be called strikes as you move up, or at least not consistently called strikes. There's always those atypical calls. That's part of the game, especially at the lower levels. But one way to shrink the pitcher's target is to have better swing decisions, better plate discipline. Now, this quote from Wade Boggs I think is even more important, particularly in Plan A. Plan A, less than 2 strikes. Here's what Wade Boggs says. "My hitting zone is tighter than the strike zone." Wade Boggs, one of the greatest hitters of all time, said, quote, "My hitting zone is tighter than the strike zone." This is really important to understand. Because at the 10-year-old level, assuming the umpire's calling strikes 3 inches outside of the plate on both sides, very common for pitches to be called a strike that are just 3 inches off the plate on each side. The typical strike zone area for a 10-year-old is about 400 square inches. The hitting zone is going to be between 150 and 200 square inches for most hitters. The hitting zone is determined by the area of the strike zone or the area in which the pitches pass through that they consistently can hit line drives with, or at least hard one-hoppers. We're not talking foul balls, swings and misses, of course, or pop-ups, easy fly balls. Pitches they can drive through the infield, over the infielders' heads for doubles. Now, the hitting zone is going to vary depending on the ability of the hitter, of course, and the size of the hitter. But typically, it's about half the size or less than that of the strike zone. Now, as the hitters get a little older, say 12 or 14U, or even high school, the strike zone will stay similar in square inches in size, in that typically the umpire calls fewer pitches on the outside part of the plate or off the plate, away and inside. But the hitters get taller, so the strike zone gets a little bit bigger vertically and a little tighter horizontally, although I've seen high school and college umpires call pitches 6 inches off the plate, so don't be shocked if that happens. The hitting zone needs to be tighter than the strike zone. And that leads me into a quote here from a great hitting coach, one of the best hitting coaches or most respected hitting coaches in the country. He's a college coach, LSU's coach, Jay Johnson. One of the biggest reasons Coach Jay Johnson has had so much success at LSU and is considered one of the best coaches in the game is his ability to teach hitters to be better hitters, to teach the hitting game. He said, quote, "If you swing outside the strike zone, if you swing at pitches outside the strike zone at LSU, you will not play," end quote. Now, I'm going to break this down and unpack it. First off, this is awesome that the emphasis on swinging at the right pitches is so high, such a large emphasis on swinging at the right pitches. So Coach Jay Johnson says, if you swing at pitches outside of the strike zone, you will not play at LSU. And when he said it, it's very matter of fact. In fact, I got that quote off a video I was watching of him recently. Now, a couple things as we unpack this. I think this pertains much more so to Plan 2, our two-strike approach. I think Coach Johnson could add to this and say, if you swing outside of pitches in your hitting zone, if you swing at pitches outside of your hitting zone, it's likely that you don't play at LSU. Then I would take his specific quote, if you swing outside the strike zone at LSU, you won't play. And I would apply that specifically to the two-strike approach. Now, there are some challenges with this mindset, especially at the youth level. One, kids are going to swing at pitches outside of the zone. And if they're so scared to swing at pitches close to the edge of the strike zone, or they're not sure if it's in or out of the strike zone, what are they going to do if this is your hard and fast rule? They're not going to swing, right? Coach said, I won't play if I swing at pitches outside of the strike zone. I didn't hear him say anything about taking pitches in the strike zone on the fringes. We don't want to create overly passive hitters here. Now, of course, Coach Johnson is not removing players if they swing at one pitch or even a few pitches outside of the strike zone. What he's alluding to here, although he didn't say it, it's very clear. If his hitters consistently swing at pitches outside of the zone, they're not going to play. So keep that in mind. And again, I'm trying to curate this excellent, top-notch information that's out there in the baseball world coming from coaches like Jay Johnson. I'm trying to synthesize it, not just so it's usable at the youth level, but also to make sure there's 100% clarity on the message being shared, the coaching message being shared, the caveats to each of these messages. So it's crystal clear when we go out there with our team, what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And if players want to move up and play at the college level, one of the most respected college coaches is coming out and saying it. If you swing at pitches outside of the zone at LSU, you're not going to play. Now, the pitches that get called strikes at the youth level, they're going to come in outside of the strike zone and get called strikes frequently. It is what it is. Partly, it's because the pitchers struggle to throw strikes as consistently at the lower levels, right? So you got to keep the game moving somewhat. You don't want it to just be a 100% walk fest, which is why I'm a huge fan of using machine pitch until a certain age, until kids can throw strikes consistently. I think it should be machine pitch as much as possible. Or at a minimum, you have a machine ready to go if the pitcher can't throw strikes. He walks the kid, then the machine pitch is ready. It's right behind the pitcher. There's a coach there that can stand between the defensive players and the machine. You could even put a little buffer around it so nobody runs into it, but that's probably not going to happen. Now, it's important to work the swing decision even at the lower levels. Just keep in mind that it will be adjusted a little bit due to some of the pitches that will be called strikes at the lower levels versus the higher levels of baseball. So, coaches, parents, players, you want to play at the higher levels. You want to play at the college level. You got an elite coach coming out right now and saying, you want to play at this level, swing at strikes. Why not start working at that now? Might be modified a little bit for the lower levels, but it should be worked on. So phase 4 of the 5 phases of hitting, swing decisions. When to swing, when not to swing. What makes a great hitter, yes, is what they can do when they swing the bat. The amount of line drives they can hit, the percentage of line drives they can hit fair when they swing. And the other part, which is just as important, are all the pitches that the hitter doesn't swing at. Like Steve Jobs famously said at Apple, he said they were more proud at Apple of the products they didn't make than the products they did make. Because all those products they didn't make, he said, gave them the energy and the time to focus on the products they did make. In fact, quite a few of you are probably listening to this podcast with one of those very products right now. Great hitting is as much about the pitches we don't swing at as it is the pitches we swing at. About a year ago, I was sitting behind the backstop watching a really high-level high school game nearby, and I was sitting with my old high school coach. He's a Hall of Fame, National Hall of Fame coach, and I was sitting with my old assistant coach from the same team. They won a national title, a USA Today national championship, multiple Southern California championships, plethora of professional, college, major league players came out of there. And one of the best players to ever come out of there, his name was Tommy Nicholson. And he was one of the best hitters I ever saw. Played with him in Little League all the way up through. And I asked them, I said, hey, what made Tommy so great? Why was he the California Player of the Year his senior year? He went to Texas, got drafted professionally, and they talked about his swing. They were talking about his swing. They said, hey, his swing, he could really make contact. He could drive the ball all parts of the field. He could hit for average. He could hit for power, all of which were true. But after they shared out, and these were his coaches, after they shared that out, I said, I watched him hit from the time he was 8 in Little League, all the way through the time that I watched him hit in college. And I said, you know why he separated himself from all the other hitters? It was the pitches he didn't swing at. He had an elite 99.99 percentile swing decision success rate. And once I mentioned that, they completely agreed. I said, what allowed him to have such a good batting average, to hit home runs, to hit doubles, to make great contact, to make his swing look elite, which it was. Hey, the fastest way to make your swing look good is swing at better pitches. And he swung at better pitches than anybody I've ever seen in person at any level. Now, let's finish this up with something I think is probably the most interesting part of this entire discussion. If I were to tell you I had 5 hitters from last season, hitters in the MLB, if I were to tell you the following batting averages on pitches that were thrown in the strike zone of these 5 hitters, would you be able to guess who these 5 major league hitters are? All right, these are areas of the strike zone, and this is the player's batting average for pitches in that area of the strike zone. So these are pitches that cross the plate in the strike zone. And here are the batting averages. You ready? A $173, 205, 150, 167, and 174. By the way, I don't know why baseball has to do the 3 numbers, the 3 digits. Can we just say 17%, 15%? I can't be the only one who's ever thought of that. We don't really need the 3rd number in the batting average. It's just a percentage. Nobody ever says they had 173% out of 1,000, right? Everybody just says, oh, it was a 17%. Anyways, I digress. If I was commissioner of baseball, I'd propose a change to the batting average rule. Let's just use 2 digits. There's no reason to turn the percentage into a 3 digit. We don't do it anywhere else, right? Now, you have 5 hitters on pitches that crossed over the strike zone. Now, the caveat here is in certain parts of the strike zone that had batting averages on those pitches of 173, 205, 150, 167, and 174. And you might also be saying, Coach Bo, I thought you didn't like batting average. Batting average, it omits 2 massive things that are crucial. It doesn't count walks, and it counts every hit the same. So the bloop single and the double into the gap are worth the same amount. So of course, there are 2 massive flaws with batting average. The biggest one is it doesn't count walks. Hitters don't get any increase in batting average when they get a walk. Yet walks are so pivotal and so vital to an offense's success. But I'm using batting average because it's like a universal language. We all speak it. We all understand it. We know what's good, what's not good. Batting average, nice universal stat we all understand. So you got these hitters. Only one of them batted over 200 at 237. The rest were under 100. One of them batted a $150. Now these were pitches that were in the strike zone, not pitches outside that they chased. Now I have a point here that I think is really important. What if I were to tell you these are the names of those 5 players? Shohei Ohtani, Cal Raleigh, Freddie Freeman, Juan Soto, and Kyle Tucker, who just signed like a $60 million a year contract. $60 million a year. Kyle Tucker batted 174 on pitches in a certain part of the strike zone. You can see these heat maps on Baseball Savant. Now here's what I'm getting at. Freddie Freeman, probably the best pure hitter right now in the game, at least over the last 15 years. Freddie Freeman barely bats 200 on pitches in the upper part of the strike zone. Freddie Freeman bats 423 on pitches down the middle. His batting average on pitches in the lower part of the strike zone is 350. Freddie Freeman's batting average on pitches in the top of the strike zone, not above the strike zone, in the strike zone, but at the top of the strike zone, is about 200. That is a massive difference. Cal Raleigh hit pitches in the middle of the strike zone with a 382 batting average. But on pitches away, still in the strike zone, but on the outer third, his batting average was about 240. So from 350 to 240, pitches not that far away from each other. The plate is only 17 inches wide. So at most, those pitches would be a little less than 12 inches apart. But on average, they're probably about 7 or 8 inches apart. And the batting average goes up well over 100 points. Juan Soto, he hits a certain spot of the strike zone at a 419 clip. And he hits another part of the strike zone at a 173 clip. That's like 2.5 times better. These pitches are only about 8 to 10 inches apart on average. And his batting average is 2.5 times higher. The hitting zone is not the strike zone. This applies to every hitter at every level. It's not just exclusive to major league hitters. It's just easy to find their heat maps, and that's why I brought it up. And we know these players. We know how great these players are. These are the best hitters in the world, and their batting averages on pitches in the strike zone go as low as a $150, because with less than 2 strikes, we're not trying to swing at pitches in the strike zone. Hitters should be swinging at pitches in their hitting zone. What is the hitting zone? The pitches, the area that they can cover consistently and then hit hard ground balls, hard line drives to all parts of the field. The area of the strike zone where pitches pass through that hitters can consistently hit line drives off of. Pitches they can drive, make solid contact, barrel up, and not just make easy outs. Not just weak fly balls, weak ground balls, weak foul balls. We're not up there trying to make contact with less than 2 strikes. We're up there trying to hit line drives. With 2 strikes, yeah, you got to make some contact, especially on those fringe pitches. But I think the baseball community would underestimate how low elite hitters' batting averages are on pitches in the strike zone because they're not in the area of the strike zone that is their hitting zone. The hitting zone and the strike zone are not the same thing. Freddie Freeman has a better batting average on low pitches. His batting average on pitches in the top part of the strike zone, the top third of the strike zone, would probably cost him a starting spot. That batting average hovering around 210, 220, that's not gonna secure you any job. Why is he one of the great hitters of his generation? When a third of the strike zone, his batting average might lead the manager to think twice about starting him. It's because he rakes in the other 2/3 and especially that bottom third. His hitting zone. He also, with 2 strikes, does an awesome job of fouling off pitches and putting the ball in play when the pitcher makes their pitch. So we're not going to dive too much into the plan 2 here. We've talked about that at length, but I wanted to clearly illustrate that a hitter's hitting zone is not the same as the strike zone. No hitter, not Freddie Freeman, not Shohei Ohtani, not Cal Raleigh, not Juan Soto, not a guy who just signed a $60 million a year deal, Kyle Tucker, none of them can cover the whole strike zone. It's too much real estate to cover and hit line drives consistently with. There's pitchers' pitches, there's hitters' pitches, and then there's just everything that's way outside or things that bounce in the dirt or way up high. The strike zone has essentially 2 parts, the pitcher's zone and the hitting zone. Hitters need to know what their zone is and go for it. And then whatever's not their hitting zone, they give to the pitcher. Don't do it the other way around. Don't say, well, this is the pitcher's zone. This is where he pitches well, and then I'm going to cover that area. No, stick to what works for your hitter, for their swing, for their timing, what they've shown consistently in batting practice and in past performances, what areas they've shown to cover and hit well. Then that's their hitting zone. It's really easy to figure this out. Throw them a bunch of pitches, which they're going to see a bunch of pitches in batting practice and scrimmages and real games. Which areas do they hit well and which areas don't they hit? Those areas they cover really well, that they consistently hit for line drives, those are the pitches they should be swinging at. It doesn't need to be perfect. Hitters are going to make mistakes. I think we got to be careful overcoaching this and getting our hitters tense and tight. I'd rather them swing a little bit bigger than their hitting zone than not, but they should know the ballpark area, no pun intended, of what their hitting zone is. Now, I'll finish with this stat. Last year, 700,000 pitches at the major league level. Pitches on the lower corners of the strike zone. So in the strike zone, but on the lower outside corners. The average of the league batting averages was almost a third of what it was on pitches middle and even middle up. Pitches in the middle of the strike zone were swung and missed at just 15% of the time. But on the lower outside corners of the strike zone, pitches were swung and missed at 55% of the time. So the major league hitters make contact on pitches in the middle of the strike zone about 3.5 times more often than pitches that are still in the strike zone, but on the bottom fringes. Now, most hitters will hit the higher pitch better, the upper part of the strike zone better. It's easier to hit line drives, the pitches belt high. But there are hitters, Mike Trout, Freddie Freeman, and there are hitters on your team that'll probably hit the lower part of the strike zone better. I'm bringing this up because more often than not, the hitting zone is going to be a little more elevated. More often than not, hitters are going to do better with pitches in the top part of the strike zone, that top half of the strike zone versus the lower half. Typically, hitters are going to do better with that pitch, but that's not a definite. It's just something to keep in mind when you're coaching up your hitters. Each hitter should know their hitting zone. They need feedback often during batting practice for this. I'm not a big fan of overcoaching and giving too much feedback, but one area, probably the area of all areas that I feel like we should give quick, short, concise, consistent feedback is swing decisions. Just quick affirmation. Whether they hit it for a line drive or whether they swing and miss, it's really good to reinforce and give that feedback to hitters. That's a good pitch to swing at. If they swing at a pitch they should have taken, take that pitch. They might be behind a pitch because their timing's off, but it was the right pitch to swing at. Let them know. Good swing decision. All right, I'm going to add a tip to increase the reps that hitters get to work on their swing decisions. I'm going to share that next week. This is something I have not shared out before on the podcast. In fact, it's just something I thought of and kind of wrote down and went through within the last month. I'm going to share next week a tip to increase the amount of reps hitters get throughout the season to work on their swing decisions. So I'll share that next week. Shout out to all the coaches that are buying the coaching plan. I put a lot into it so you could have everything that I wish I had when I started coaching and then some. You can get that at 8020baseball.com right there on the homepage. And next week I'll share that tip about how to increase the opportunities hitters have to work on their swing decision. And we'll break down part 5 of our 5-part series, the 5 phases of hitting. And I got another very interesting stat to shine some light on how we can better coach up our players to be great hitters. All right, every Tuesday coming out with a new episode. Head over to 8020baseball.com. Tons of good stuff over there. Elevate your coaching game efficiently, effectively. And until next week, let's keep taking care of our health so we can be at our best for our families, our close friends, our team. Take this information, go out there, put it into play. Don't let it just sit up there between your ears or on some notepad somewhere. All right, y'all, take care. Until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. We got this. Now, let's take the field.